Well, lots of developments out of Malaysia over the weekend and today. In a special meeting this afternoon, Prime Minister Muhyiddin and his cabinet discussed the King's rejection of a request for him to declare a state of emergency in response to the COVID-19 pandemic.
Mr. Muhyiddin's proposal included a suspension of Parliament, where he governs with a razor-thin majority and faces a leadership challenge from opposition leader Anwar Ibrahim.
Also, it comes ahead of a vote in November on next year's budget. Now, the Prime Minister's opponents claim he's using the pandemic as an excuse to stay in power.
Malaysia Bureau Chief Shannon Teo is back with us with the latest. Now, Shannon, we're seeing a series of meetings today. Details are scarce at the moment, but what can you tell us?
Well, these meetings, of course, follow one that was held at the Prime Minister's residence last night. He was in close and deep discussion with allies and advisors in his residence all the way up to midnight last night. Now, this follows, obviously, the royal rebuttal of his request for emergency. Following that, this morning, Prime Minister Muhyiddin met party leaders from his ruling Perikatan Nasional before going into another special cabinet meeting. We recall they had one on Friday, which made the initial request for an emergency. Now, we don't exactly know what has been the result of those discussions. What we do know now is that UMNO President Zahid Hamidi is now in a meeting with Barisan Nasional MPs. Now, Barisan Nasional has 42 MPs, and if they pull out of Perikatan Nasional, then Muhyiddin Yassin is no longer Prime Minister. He doesn't have the majority. So it is a very fluid situation right now. UMNO MPs are saying that the meeting is about discussing whether they still continue to support Tan Sri Muhyiddin. One of the on the backdrop of this is, of course, that the King said that he is pleased with the current government and he wants politicians to stop undermining it. So the question now is whether UMNO is going to make a decision which is contradictory to this decree.
Well, Shannon, let's go back to what happened over the weekend. So we know that the King rejected Mr. Muhyiddin's emergency bid. In your analysis, though, you wrote that Mr. Muhyiddin still has the royal endorsement. But what does that mean for the Prime Minister?
Well, I think that what the King has said is that it's not right to hold an emergency just to deal with the COVID situation, because we have the necessary laws. We've been doing it for the past 6 months. We've been handling the COVID situation. We've been keeping the numbers relatively low, the deaths relatively low. So we have the tools already at our disposal to handle it. Now, if the emergency is about a political situation, well, the King has addressed it. He said that I'm pleased with what this government has done, and I want politicians to stop undermining it. I want MPs to stop being irresponsible by trying to undermine this government. And he made specific reference to Budget 2021 that is supposed to be tabled next month. Now, if the budget is defeated, then of course the government collapses. And he's made specific mention that this budget is very important and we should put aside political differences and support it. That's what the King has said. So it is, in effect, an endorsement for Muhyiddin in the short term. And I joked with some friends that it's like giving you a free Netflix trial for a month or so. And after that, we'll see what happens, whether you like the product.
Now, in the same vein, Shannon, what does this mean for Mr. Muhyiddin's opponents, namely Anwar Ibrahim and even Mahathir Mohamad? Will they attempt to have a go at Mr. Muhyiddin again, even with the King's endorsement?
I think right now it is always very politically costly to try and contradict a royal decree, whether at state level or at national level. The popular sentiment must be so strongly with you to attempt something like that. Of course, Mahathir has done things like this when he was in power 20, 30 years ago. He was so popular back then that he did clip the wings of the royals many times. I doubt that he will try again now, purely because there is no certainty about who has the numbers, who has the majority. I think Anwar Ibrahim has issued a kind of a non-committal statement, but our sources are saying that in PKR, they don't feel that it is also the right time to try and topple the Muhyiddin government, unless the Prime Minister himself chooses to resign. His allies, Anwar's largest ally, DAP, is already making very loud noises about a supply and confidence deal to support the budget. As long as Muhyiddin is willing to make certain concessions, is willing to discuss and go into a committee to discuss what is most important for the country in this budget.
Right. Well, Shannon, as you know, Parliament is set to take place in a week on November the 2nd. What could happen between now and then, though, and even on the day itself?
Well, I think for those who want to see the King's decree carried out, to see that the government does not collapse and that the budget is passed, we'll see a lot of negotiations, a lot of horse trading, perhaps even all the way up into next week, because the budget only has to be tabled on Friday, on November 6th. So we've got about 10 days for politicians in this country, policy makers in this country, to come to a deal which pleases enough MPs for the budget to pass. But of course, politically, a lot can happen. There might be people who say, well, I don't care about the budget. I just want to change the government. It also depends on whether the king is willing to swear in a new prime minister, even if someone else had the majority. Or do we go into what everyone's been trying to avoid, a snap election in the middle of, what is the third wave of the coronavirus outbreak in Malaysia?
Okay, good to speak with you as always, Shannon. That was Malaysia Bureau Chief for the Straits Times, Shannon Teo. StraitsTimes.com has all the developments from across the causeway.